Chapter 22. When Nell finished working with Rumba, she changed from riding clothes to a flowered print house dress. After dinner, she did the housework she had not finished that morning, then went out on the terrace. She sighed when she looked at the window boxes and the flower border, with the blossoms beaten to shreds by the hail of the day before. That was way up here on top of the world. Such things came down out of the sky. Rob, last night at supper, was telling about a hailstorm where the blocks of ice were so large a man couldn't lift one, couldn't get his arms around it, and a band of sheep had been cut to pieces. People drove out in their automobiles from the nearby towns to see the sheep that were lying around, killed by the huge chunks of ice that fell out of the sky. The dead animals made a stench for miles around, and she herself had been in Cheyenne one 4th of July when there was a bad hailstorm, and the plate glass roofs of all the greenhouses in town had been shattered, and every automobile that was in the path of the storm had its top cut to pieces. Nell found her gardening gloves and her trowel and shears, and went about clearing the broken flowers and leaves out of the boxes. No more fresh homegrown lettuce for the table this summer. The lettuce bed was cut to pieces. Too late now to start it again. The glass over the hotbed broken. Rob will have to get some more and fix it up. He'll be wild. What a stew he's in about Ken. It was I that started it. I said, give him a colt. And now look. This geranium. Ruined. Might as well cut it back to nothing. What for supper? The cold meatloaf and creamed macaroni and cheese. The oven will be right for that when I've made the cookies. Make enough this time. How these men go for sweets. And Rob will bring back the fresh tomatoes and lettuce and peaches when he comes home with the truck. Just look at this mess here. What a storm. 4 of the little Rhode Island red chicks killed. Couldn't get under Mama's wings quick enough. And when she had done what she could to put the boxes and flower beds in order, she went to the kitchen, built up the fire, and began to mix the cookies, remembering with amusement how she had evolved this cookie recipe. Rob had asked for donuts, made very rich and crisp, as he had at some time or other in his childhood eaten them. Nell studied donut recipes in several cookbooks, decided that to make them extra crisp she should use more shortening, and settled on a composite of the different recipes with generous quantities of rich Guernsey butter. When the dough was made, a great mound of it, yellow with butter, she heated the fat in the iron kettle, cut out the first donut, and dropped it in the fat to test it. Watching, she was surprised to see the donut separate into 2 halves, then into quarters, then into eighths, then into crumbs, and finally vanish altogether. Nell was in dismay, looking at the mound of yellow dough designed to melt into nothingness in the hot fat. Changing her plan, she rolled it out into thin sheets, spread it on cookie tins, then with a sharp knife crisscrossed it into diamond shapes, put it into the hot oven, and presently took out a batch of the crispest, richest, brown-edged cookies she had ever tasted. This became the special cookie recipe of the Goose Bar Ranch, and whenever Nell was requested to make them, they told her, "Start to make donuts." Now the oven was ready, and when she had nearly finished mixing the bowl, Ken came into the kitchen. He leaned against the table, his elbows propped, his chin in his hand. A little red bandana was tied around his neck. His soft brown hair was in wild disorder. "If Flicka's really loco, Mother." His appearance shocked Nell. The look in his eyes was direct, almost staring, nothing like Ken. He was looking at her now, to drag facts from her. "Well, Kenny, if she's loco, it's a bad lookout for her then, isn't it?" There was a long silence. He struggled. "If she really is, Mother." "If she really is, Ken, then not all the king's horses and all the king's men." Nell didn't finish, but flung the dough out on the table, floured the rolling pin, and began to roll it out. Ken watched her, hooked on that terrible if. Mother, is there anything you want terribly? Nell paused, looking out the window, and began rolling the pin lightly over the dough again. Kenny, there's something I've wanted terribly for a long time. How long? Since a few years after you were born. But Mother, I didn't know you wanted anything. Most everyone wants something, dear. But not you, Mother. You've grown up and married, and you've got Dad and us. Why, you're finished. Nell laughed. And I shouldn't be wanting still then if I'm finished, should I? But people do, Kenny. Everyone? Always, Mother? Don't you ever really get finished? Nell again put down the rolling pin and stood with a faraway look in her blue eyes. I wonder, sometimes, for a minute or two. That brief experience of peace and fulfillment that came, she thought, now and then, unexpectedly, and was unaccountably. Why should one at a certain moment be held in the stress and ceaseless striving and wanting, and the next be almost swooning in desireless bliss, open, drinking, basking? Mother? Well, do you? Will I? Will you what? Get through wanting? What do you want now, Kenny? There was a feeling in his chest that his breath was too much for it and crowded it. Mother, I do so want Flicka to be all right and not loco. Nell looked at him, rolling the dough thinner and thinner. In his eyes she saw a question. He was asking if it wouldn't come true if he wanted it hard enough, and his face was strained in anguish. Right now, she thought, narrowing her eyes against the tears that came so quickly, stinging them, right now, to let him know once and for all that wanting and wishing can't buck a fact. Perhaps she isn't loco, dear. We don't know yet for sure. But if she is, Ken, her words came slowly, wanting won't change it. Ken turned away and walked out of the kitchen with his chin tucked down into his neck. Come back when the cookies are baked, dear, she called after him. There'll be some hot, crisp, brown, crumbly ones. She went on rolling out the dough, cutting the cookies, putting them on tin sheets in the hot oven. But she had really gone away with Ken, up the hill, into the woods, face down on the pine needles, hands clawing on the ground, salt tears burning. No, Kenny, not all your love and longing, not all the wishing and wanting. But she didn't know that Ken was seeing the deep hollow shaft of the mine on the hillside, with a horse going down into it, not Rocket. He couldn't stand it. There must be a way out. There always had been. Ken turned over on his back and looked up at the sky. It was close. It was a deep blue, but not opaque. It looked as if you could go into it, farther and farther. Thinking this way, just drifting, he began to feel better. There were well-trodden paths in his mind that led out and away from the real and on into the limitless worlds of fancy. He stopped thinking about Flicka, stopped thinking about anything real. In that other world of fancy, there were colts and fillies too. He wanted the make-believe colt that couldn't hurt itself, that could fly over 6-foot fences, that needn't be broken and trained, that couldn't be loco, that would carry him on its back as easily as a bird carries one of its own feathers. He began to feel comfortable and free. This was the way. This was the way. The boy lay motionless, his eyes wide, his gaze straight upward into the blue. The lines of strain on his face relaxed. His mouth was slightly open, his expression faintly smiling. An hour slid by. The light changed, The shadows lay long and flat over the world. A bird began to cry on an insistent, anxious note, but Ken did not hear or move. His breathing was regular and deep, but there was a pause between breaths, as with a person sleeping. The insistent clanging of the supper bell roused him, and he sat up, startled. How could it ever be supper time already? He turned in the opposite direction and looked to Flicka's place near the 3 pine trees in the calf pasture. She was laying down, not very far from where he had put the tub of water and the feed box. Something about the weariness of her body, prone on the grass, the utter stillness of it, wrenched at his heart. He had forgotten all about her and had been off by himself having fun. Supper, he mustn't be late. He ran down the hill, across the green and into the kitchen, and washed his face and hands and slicked his hair. All his agony was back. Flicka, why, she might be dead out there, lying dead instead of just asleep. One couldn't tell. And if she was, it would be his fault, because he had really deserted her when he was thinking about all those other make-believe colts. He had turned his back on her. Perhaps his disloyalty might have broken the slight hold she had on life. Perhaps somehow she had known it, had known what he was doing, that he didn't want her anymore, and perhaps she had felt more and more tired and weak, and had last lain down and... After supper, he hurried out to meet her. She was standing up again, and this time barely moved it away at all at his approach. He sat down before her on the grass, clasped his arms around his knees, and made his vows to her. I didn't mean it, Flicka. You're the one I want. I won't leave you again. Never, Flicka. I don't want those other colts. They're nothing, simply nothing at all. And you're my responsibility. That's what Dad said. I pulled you in from the range when you were free and wild and could take care of yourself. And I've made you so you can't. So you are my responsibility to take care of. Flicka stood looking at him. Her large eyes were dull and not fully opened. All her hair was very untidy. Her legs were not quite straight under her, but a little splayed out. But her ears were forward. She seemed to be listening, to be paying attention, and she was not frightened.